Hello, welcome to Distillery Sessions, the podcast from Distillery. I'm your host, Peter Hofer, and today I am joined by Nicole Brannan, founder of the Together Lab.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for having me.
No, my pleasure. And how are you holding up?
Yeah, the sun is shining, which always makes a big difference, I think, to everybody's day. And gradually, I think the world feels like it's starting to return to something that we might recognise. So, yeah, one step at a time, but all good here.
Excellent. All right. So maybe to kick us off, could you share a brief intro to you and the Together Lab?
Yeah, so the Together Lab is, I founded it in 2017, so it's not been going that long. And with my intention was to specialise essentially in co-creation, because that's the area that I'm passionate about. It's the area that I've been developing and working and advocating for years and years. And I got to the point where I thought, you know, the world needs specialists now, not generalists. And quite frankly, that's the bit that I believe in. And if you believe in something, you're likely to be good at it. So, yeah, that's what we offer, co-creation methodologies for all sorts of challenges. And we just tailor them according and make them bespoke as much as we can.
And as a founder of your own organization, that's quite a few challenges on top of your day job. So what have you learned about yourself leading your own team and your own organization?
It's actually quite a shock, because it's very easy to look at other organizations and say, oh, I can do that. And actually, if you have a creative leaning, coming up with ideas is not difficult at all. They're always there. But making something happen and turning it into reality is really hard work. And when you first start, mine was a real bootstrap operation. And so I tried to do absolutely everything myself, from content to creative to finance to IT to the lot. And it's exhausting. And of course, you can't be good at everything. And I certainly am not. And so what happens is you realize that you actually can't grow a business unless you start to enlist the help of others. But that needs investment. And that's a challenge for people. I've got a partner who's self-employed, and if we put money in his business, I'm more guaranteed of making a return. So I have been reluctant to invest, and I'm starting to realize that actually you really do need to invest in your business in order to grow it. So I guess that was probably the biggest thing for me, was the shock and realizing that you just can't do everything.
No, I assume it's a ongoing learning experience. Could you tell us a bit more about co-creation? That's an interesting term that I'm sure we'd like to learn more about.
Yeah, so co-creation has actually been around for a long time. It was founded at the beginning of the turn of the 2000s, really. And it started from business academics who turned around and said, the time of having consumer right at the very end of the process is sort of up now. That sort of production to sales process was very of the last generation. And as we have more and more choice and companies are trying to build in more and more value, how do you build in value? And lots of academics then sort of built on this idea and said, well, actually, people buy brands for the job to be done. They're buying the service that the brand gives them. And therefore, if you involve consumers along the way, you can find ways to build in value. So the term co-creation is, the clue's in the name, really. It's bring people together, all the invested parties. So that can be your stakeholders, external stakeholders. It could be your retailers. It's most definitely your consumers if you're a B2C consumer, a B2C business. And it's just bringing them all together to find ways of creating mutual value. That's what it's about. And there's all sorts of other terms that go around it, agile thinking, crowdsourcing, design thinking, but essentially they're all trying to find ways to learn from their consumers, build in value. So it's a nomenclature, really. The principle's always the same.
So that sounds like a big leap forward to more traditional market research activities, where a client might just give you and the team a brief. We'd like to learn this about our customers. and then off you go to speak with that cohort, whether in a focus group or telephone.
Yeah, it is. It's very different. And I think that's where co-creation actually is superior to normal qualitative. And it's not the quality of the researchers. I've met some absolutely fantastic quality researchers over my career. But the issue is that they bring the insights to you and then they leave the client with the insights. So they have the insights, but they don't have the empathy because they weren't there. And that's the difference, really. If you are up close and personal and you hear the stories face to face, you get your consumer in a way that you can't if you're being given a secondhand message. It's like buying. I always use the analogy. It's like asking a friend to buy a present for your mum, and explaining to them everything that they're like. They're like this, they're like that. The chances that you will be able to go and buy a perfect present for them, if you don't know them, is actually quite slim. If you met them, you get them. And that's the point. That is the real difference, really. And so I am adamant that in order for it to work, the client needs to be part of that process so that they can hear it for themselves. And the more stakeholders you bring in that process, so ideally creatives, whoever it is that's going to be influence what's going to happen next once you've got those insights, if they hear it for themselves, they will hear the same thing as well. And you don't get this Chinese whispers, which is what I've seen in organizations and what used to frustrate me as a client and then as a consultant later on. You get great ideas and they just, you suddenly look at them later on and you think, but that was never the idea. And it's just Chinese whispers. People aren't stupid, but they haven't all heard the same thing. It's just been one step removed. So that's the big difference.
And what has client feedback been like to these co-creation projects?
They have always, and I've been doing this, whilst I set up co-creation in 2017, I've been doing co-creation for about 20 years in one form or another. And they always love it. People love getting up close and personal. The level of insight that you get is so much more. And my ambition for my methodologies was to give you breadth and depth of insight. So they love them. And clients align quickly because you're on a journey together. So when you've got a whole team listening in, later on, you obviously unpack it all and say goodbye to the consumer and you go, okay, so what do we all think now? And that's when you get that shared learning. And people bring different perspectives, and you get a bunch of bright people in the room. You get really great insights that come from that. Better, I think, than one individual coming back and saying, okay, so this is the story. So they like participating. It's hard work and it's diary intensive. So there are some downsides to it. And it also relies on a lot of trust because you are up close and personal. And if you're a young client and you've invited your boss and you're worried, supposing this is live. I mean, you can't hide from any of it. We're not behind a double-sided mirror. Everybody is involved. So there's a fair amount of bravery and it takes a bit of a leap of faith. And that's always been the challenge when you come to sell it in. Once you've sold it in and they've done it, they always come back.
I think that's a really key word, trust, that you brought up. Is that, trust between you and the client, trust between, the client's colleagues themselves, or trust between, the client and customers, or, perhaps a bit of everything?
I think it's everything, actually. I think to create the right environment, you need consumers need to feel that they can trust you. Sometimes the topics are, fairly general, but sometimes they can be pretty intimate and personal, and they need to be in an environment where they feel that it's safe. The client needs to trust you because, they're having to follow you along and you're guiding. The idea behind agile working is that you go down a pathway. If it's not working, you have to turn around and do something different. So they can't plan it all out. So they do need to trust in you, and they need to have faith that consumers actually are a hell of a lot more creative than you give them credit for sometimes. And they're very insightful. You just need to give them the right tools. They don't know your business, that's for sure, but they do know what they're interested in and what they're not. And they do know about their lives a hell of a lot more than you do. So that whole idea of trust, and if particularly if you involve a retailer, then it's sort of, well, that's quite difficult. I have done a project with that. And at one point the client said, well, supposing supposing they come up with stuff and they copy it all. And I said, yeah, but you have to acknowledge that your mutual advantage here is working together, because in the end, you both need each other. So you have to find a way to win-win. And actually, if you give people that trust, they normally stand by it, and it really works. You have to acknowledge that you need each other. I think that's the important thing, because if you don't, then why would they trust you? That you're investing in them and they're putting their faith in you.
Yeah, I guess that is that the big difference between standing behind a double-sided mirror, observing, and then actually being in the room discussing.
And that's a really interesting point, because I mean, I've been a client too, and I've also done traditional quality research. And when I've been behind the mirror, I mean, it's tiring, and because you're one step removed, it's very tempting to check your phone, look at your computer, go to the fridge and get a delicious beer and a sandwich, talk amongst each other. And you really don't focus as much. When you're in the room, you can't do that because it's rude. I mean, it's just simply rude, and you're in it. So suddenly you're involved. So you get out so much more than you would if you're just an observer, because you have to focus and concentrate. So that's a really big difference, actually.
Are there any co-creation projects that you've worked on that you're especially proud of?
Yeah, if I've got time, I've got three, and then you
Okay,
can cut them
let's
out
hear them.
for very different reasons, actually. The first one, unfortunately, I can't say the brand. It's a global FMCG brand, because the project is a brand purpose project and it's still ongoing.
Mm.
But the theme, the context of that was around human connection. And the co-creation workshops that we did were so moving that they brought tears to our eyes, consumers and client alike. I mean, it was the most phenomenal time, and it really demonstrated that if you create that environment of trust, people will be very, very candid. At the end of it, when respondents left, we were doing it at a particular venue, and they said they were all taking each other's phone numbers. Now, these were young guys. They were passing each other. They'd all gone off for a drink with each other, because there was a sense of genuine connection in the room, and we all felt it. The client was incredibly moved, and in fact, they were calling we had one of the advertising creators there, and they were calling their team on another project, feeding back stuff, going, listen, we've just found this. So it was that level. Again, it was trust. That was really important. So that had a huge impact. I mean, personally as well, it really moved us. So I'm proud of that project. Unfortunately, I can't demonstrate, I can't show any of it. So hopefully, I hope one day I will. The second one we did last year, and that this was one with a retailer. So the client was a fantastic UK yogurt brand, and they invited a major retailer to join in. And it was an innovation and category development co-creation project. And what was fantastic was that level of trust, the acknowledgement that actually, even though that retailer actually does own label as well, that they would get a lot of benefit by mutually sharing everything that they had. And in order to develop the original ideas, they all had to share. I mean, both sides had to share. And what came out at the end was not only a hell of a lot more information than they would normally both sides ever get, but also a sense of a working partnership, which they hadn't had before. And that paid dividends in all sorts of ways. They spent a lot of time with each other, and so much so that the retailer actually awarded them a customer champion award at the end of it. It wasn't obviously, I would be lying if I said it was all to me. It wasn't. But co-creation had a really good part to play in developing a relationship, a shared learning, and a shared sense of direction. So that most definitely. And the last one is a quick one, only because it was quite unique, and it was a real last minute creative storyboard, again with a global client. And it was a fortuitous request. I was doing a debrief for them, and they said, oh God, we're having a nightmare. We've got to shoot something soon. We've got media booked, and we don't think our storyboard's quite working. And I said, well, maybe we try co-creation. And it was a real, I'd never done it in that way before. And we
Mm.
literally had 5 days to recruit consumers in Italy, fly people over, develop material. We spent one day with consumers and one day working it all out and saying, okay, so what do we think then? And it worked. And so that was great. And I really valued the client for being brave, because I did say to them, I have no idea whether this job can be done in co-creation, but we might as well give it a go. And they did, and it worked.
Yeah.
So I'm proud of that, because it means that you can actually adapt. And whilst I have a set methodology, it demonstrates that depending on what you need to do, you can be a little bit more creative. And sometimes you can get more than you expected. So
Mm.
those three.
So listening to the case studies, heard themes like lots of sharing, lots of partnerships between the clients and the fans and customers.
Yeah.
Is that I'm guessing from a customer or fan perspective, what do you think they're getting out of taking part in that type of co-creation project?
Well, I think for fans, two bits. I mean, undoubtedly, you are paying them, right? So this is a fun way to make a few extra bucks. So let's just be hard nosed about it. But once they're in it, they actually genuinely appreciate the fact that you acknowledge that you don't have all the answers and that you really want them to help you. And they rise to the challenge, and you'd be surprised actually how much they give you. And afterwards, of course, they've loved it so much. When I used to do it live, respondents didn't even want to go. They'd all chat round after, go, oh, it's so cool. I love, because they really, they had a go at being, brand marketing or creative director or whatever. And it's fun. And they were flattered, I think. People are flattered when you ask their opinion. And so afterwards, of course, they're going to be fantastic advocates for you, because they have an invested interest. And in a world when fans are more important than they ever were before in terms of their influence, that's not a bad thing. However, the smaller the groups, because it's a story, they suddenly go, oh, it's so cool. We did this thing and I had to create this and I had to present to everybody. And that's something that you do tell people when you've gone out for a drink with them later on, because it's different. So I think that's actually there's not the intention, but that is a benefit that you would get.
Definitely. I remember just in my, previous lives when I've been both the client and the sort of researcher as well. It's being in that environment and actually, posing the questions, and you realize that, sometimes, they don't get a chance to really talk about their opinions or their history or their relationship with the brands, and it just unlocks things that go beyond the research guide.
Absolutely. And if you ask them to tell you their stories, that's when you get the emotional tone of voice and the context. If you just keep feeding them stuff and it's fairly polished, they don't give you much. And actually one of the things that I have learned is, if you give respondents stuff that is very unfinished, it's very raw, enough for them to respond to, because it's unkind to just give them a blank piece of paper, because that would be unfair. But if you actually make it unpolished, it's easier. It gives them permission actually to improve it. And it's actually easier to say to people why you don't like something than why you like it. So I'm always saying to clients, don't get so hung up about, is this concept perfect? I'm not sure about the wording. So just, don't worry about that. And sometimes we even put ideas in that we don't think are right,
Mm.
just to hear what people say. And and that in itself unlocks a lot more learning than you would do, because in traditional research, you don't put in things you don't believe in. But if you've got breadth to do that, it's really interesting, because why people don't like something is just as interesting as why they like it.
Very true. So I suspect that the case studies that you've mentioned, all the workshop co-creation workshops happened previous to our COVID our
Yeah.
COVID times. So I'm interested to get your thoughts on how workshops changed in the age of COVID.
So I have always been a face-to-face person, and if I could go back to the old days, as things exactly were. I would go back to live, up close and personal working in a heartbeat. And the change for me, actually, I mean, it completely devastated my business. I mean, entirely, because that's what it was. Everything I did was face to face. I had some virtual online solutions, but they were always an add-on to extend country reach or something, but they were not the main, they weren't the star of the show by any means. And at one point I thought, I just don't think I want to do this, because I don't believe that you're going to get enough. And then I realized that the turning point was realizing that, okay, so let's say you do run a workshop and you're going to run it and you're going to have clients and respondents all in one room, all trying to social distance, all with masks on. That is not an environment that's going to make people feel at ease or creative or comfortable in any way. And so once I got round that, I suddenly said, okay, so now you have to work with what you've got. And there is a lot of things that you can ask people to do in advance. You have to be careful on workshops, on virtual workshops, because people tire much quicker. And that's a real challenge for clients as well, because they keep saying, well, we'll just do it in an hour. I've done a training workshop and they wanted to just do it in an hour. And I was thinking, you would normally have a role play workshop. It would be half a day. And now it's a Zoom meeting. You think it's okay to just do an hour. We just can't get enough out. But you do have to be careful especially with consumers, because they don't want to be on that for hours. So you have to cut the time so that it suits the medium. And there are some things that can be done individually and thought about in advance. The advocacy and the discussion has to be done online, face to face. You use platforms like Zoom. You have to manage them because you can't have everyone talking at once, and you can't have as many people because otherwise it takes too long. But actually, it can be done. And so I'm feeling quite hopeful that with the world as it is now, there is a way around it. We have to wait and see, actually, to be honest with you. I'm just about to do one in Germany for a Swedish client. We're recruiting at the moment, but in 10 days' time, we will be doing the live bit. Currently, they're doing the individual bit. So I don't know, because I was a face-to-face person and I've now had to pivot entirely. And I think you have to work within the means that you've got. But sometimes, you just have to be brave and have a go and say, okay, we're going to learn from it. And I'm sure I will build and refine it. But it mirrors the process that I did before. So I'm very comfortable that can work. But the only one bit that you don't have, you've got the client there and you absolutely have to have them there, is that they're not working side by side in the same way. And so they spend less time with them. But they still get to see the debate that goes on. The way that it's constructed, they still get to see that. So I think it's important that they do that. I mean, and of course it's much more sustainable. So I think it may well have a lot of longevity anyway, because it's not right that we should be traveling all the time. So from that perspective, that's a good thing.
And do you find that clients are actually quite open to the concept of virtual co-creation workshops?
I think they are realizing that there's not many viable alternatives at the moment. And it's either that or just forget about qual or just commission some online qual. But they, even then, they're even more removed. And I've done some online qual and you can check in and see how people are responding, but you still don't see them. So you still don't have the empathy in the same way. I think they realize now that they probably have to do it. Lots of when I'm talking to people, they're still trying to sort of get back to normality and they're trying to stop the firefighting bit. So I think it will come in time. Again, it will take a leap of faith, because it'll be something that no one's done, especially if you've not done co-creation before. Interesting, the client that I'm doing it with, I had done co-creation with them at the beginning of the year. And so they were a convert. I'm not sure how easy it would have been to sell it to them if they didn't know me and they'd never done my process before. I think they might have not been as brave, but who knows? They were, so I'm grateful to that.
And I guess with, as you do more and more virtual workshops, you'll discover some perhaps undiscovered benefits of.
Sure, and especially when it comes to bringing people from all around the world in. I think, then it's undoubtedly beneficial if you've got global teams and you're all in different areas, then you've got people who can come in and be part of that, whereas you were much more limited beforehand. So That's undoubtedly, and there's, I'm sure, as you say, there's undiscovered potential there for sure.
Now, in the age of COVID, how do you think the future of a client-agency relationship will develop?
I'm hoping that there's a slightly an even more stronger sense of togetherness,
Mm.
of the need for collaboration and mutual benefit. I think we've all experienced, both clients and agencies have experienced hardship, and it's been tough. And personally, what their personal lives may well have been extremely tough. So I think there's a kindness. I'm hoping that there is more of a kindness and a sense of trust, and also a sense of that this is a new world, and so they actually do need to innovate and experiment, and it's not all going to work. But if you both collaborate together and you both trust in each other and say, okay, so we're just going to find ways to keep making this better, and there isn't a blame culture on you should be doing this, because I'm paying you. I think if you give trust to an agency, they will jump through hoops. It is far better to get people to do that than through fear in the end, because it's just, you'll go above and beyond. You always will, because you like them. You want it to work, and you'll try everything you possibly can. And because we are in this new world, and the virtual world is new to many companies, I think they have to appreciate that we are all experimenting, and from that we can be innovative. But so I'm hoping that there's more trust between each other and more room for experimentation.
No, I completely agree on the growing levels of trust and kindness, because just being in meetings with my own colleagues and clients, of being on these Zoom meetings and seeing each other's kids or pets, or inside of the home, that gives a more level of intimacy, but also level of trust and humanity that I find it's a nice bonus, if we can call it that, from this time.
Let's hope that bit's here to stay. I hope so.
Well, I think we are close to the end of our time, but before we leave, I just wanted to ask a couple of quick fire questions that I ask all of our interviewees. So the first one is, what's the last thing you recommended to a friend or family member?
Okay, so that's easy actually, because I recommended it this morning. The last couple of days I've been watching a documentary on BBC iPlayer. I'm using my notes to make sure I say the right thing. It's called Once Upon a Time in Iraq.
Ah.
And it tells the story of the fall of Saddam, and then the bloody war that follows. And it's all through personal stories, and it's told to camera from the Iraqis themselves, journalists, soldiers. It is so powerful. And it's heartbreaking and frustrating, and shows obviously the futility of war and the consequence of actions. But it is the fact that it is their stories. I mean, it is just brilliant. So I would highly recommend that one. So it's called, Once Upon a Time in Iraq.
Definitely, I'll add that to my iPlayer list. And the next question is, what are you a fan of that might surprise most people?
Well, I'm not. It might surprise people because obviously I love brands, but I am a super fan of a business called Beauty Pie, and I absolutely love lotions and potions, textures and smells. I cannot get enough of them. I'm a very sensorial person, so I came across Beauty Pie about 2 years ago. It's a subscription model, and the idea is it's ex-factory, very good quality products sold at ex-factory prices and unbranded, apart from its Beauty Pie. And I thought I'd just do it for a couple of months. I thought, it's cool. I just wanted to try it out for, I work in those categories. And 2 years later, I have spent a fortune. My cupboards are packed. I have given them as presents. I've recruited, I don't know how many people to them. The woman that set it up is a fantastic entrepreneur called Marcia Kilgore, and I think she set up Fit Flop and Bliss. And she really knows her audience, and her audience are people like me who just love experimenting. And, it's affordable. It's like being a kid in a candy store for me. And so you don't need all that stuff. And I would never buy it all if it was all brands, because I just couldn't justify that expenditure. But it's just you're there to play, and it's brilliant. So yeah, I am a super fan.
Fantastic. Well, so if people wanted to get in contact with you, Nicole, what's the best way?
Direct on my website, www.thetogetherlab.com, or Nicole at the Together Lab, or via LinkedIn. I am gradually coming around to the 21st century and starting a Twitter page. And, I am actually trying to
Yeah.
take on board the virtual world. But LinkedIn or through my website is probably the easiest, and I'll get back to them immediately.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Nicole, for joining me today, and I want to thank everyone for listening. Please follow Distillery on our socials at We Are Distillery. Stay safe, and we look forward to welcoming you to our next episode very soon. Thanks, everyone.